So welcome to the Lovefly Fear of Flying Q&A. Hi, my name is Paul Tizard, and again, it's been a little while since I did this, a couple of weeks, and that's because I was away. Me and Lovefly Bear, here he is, oh, his head's disappeared. We were in Cairo last week, and went around. You might have seen a few pictures on Instagram and also on the in the Lovefly group. Here he is. Anyway, so I'm really pleased to be back. It was a fantastic experience. And I was kind of reminded that it's been a long time since I've been on quite a few flights. You'll be pleased to know, because obviously I like flying, but I haven't been on a holiday for ages because of the, I don't know if you remember that pandemic thing. Yes, it kind of got in the way of stuff, didn't it? And I realized it's actually been 3 or 4 years since I've been on a proper long haul flight to somewhere exotic. So over to Cairo, to the pyramids and all that sort of stuff. And I was just reminded how fantastic travel is. Lots of reasons, actually. And so one of the things I want to say is that traveling is not always comfortable, is it? So if you're going to a completely different culture, then you have to adjust to different foods and stuff. And so initially, that can be a bit disconcerting because you're used to, particularly if you have a certain types of foods all the time. But I have to say, I had a fantastic welcome at this resort. It wasn't very touristy, so we had lots of people coming up to us taking pictures, because me and my daughters, who are all blonde and dark hair, we had, it was like being a celebrity. Well, the nearest I get to being a celebrity anyway. And they're kind of taking photos, take a picture of us, and it was just like a different world. And that reminded me of how fantastic it is to go away and do stuff, because then you get to experience different cultures, different ways of living. It was just remarkable. So very, very grateful for that. It was very hot as well. I didn't know hot could be so hot. So like 41 degrees. So yes, melted. So welcome to the, like I say, the Fear of Flying Q&A. Thank you for the questions that you posted. We'll get onto this in a sec. I'm hoping that you've enjoyed the last couple of weeks of podcasts. It's been bonkers in terms of the numbers, so thank you so much. I haven't even looked, but last week it was something like 23,000 downloads in 30 days, which is just mad. I don't know what to make of all that. So very humbling. So thank you. But I haven't looked this week, so it's been crazy. And the Lovefly Facebook group has been going up as well. We're up to 2.6 thousand members now, so lots and lots of lovely people coming through every week, and it's this nice steady trickle between 50 and 80 people a week are joining us. So that's a phenomenal number of people, and you're all very welcome. Hope you get what you need from joining the group. The Instagram page is also growing. We've had some conversations with some people who know a bit more about social media. And there's going to be a few more changes to the way that we do these things as well, just to sort of more in line with what people want. So that's going to change the way the podcast goes slightly. And also there may be some other forms of things that appear in terms of the way that we operate. But I'll tell you about those once we've actually done them, because otherwise it's just hot air. It's just hot air. So great questions. I don't know which one to go with first, really. Water, that's what I'll do. If in doubt, lubricate. So same on flights as well. Take your own water. I realised last week I flew with British Airways, with a great airline, but you don't get much water on board, do you? So I'm always prepared for that. So I had a massive, big thing of water. And so even though it was a 4 or 5 hour flight, we were didn't go thirsty, so it could be self-sufficient. The other thing that's changed is you have to pay for so much more now, don't you? But the days are gone where you got it all for free. Right, okay. So Andrew posted a question about, the question was this, basically, I'm going to paraphrase it slightly. Methods to detect rapid depressurization, so a nice light start. If you can't ask it here, where can you? I know some of you be going, it's actually triggered me and made me worse reading the Facebook posts and some of these questions that people ask. And the same used to happen on the face-to-face courses when we ran those. People would say, I was okay until I met that person, And then he just asked something which has made me even more scared. And that's the whole thing. You've got to face your demons, you know, because you can't be going around thinking, I'm okay as long as no one mentions the word turbulence or no one says this, or because you've got to be okay regardless whether the weather's crappy, whether you have a change of aircraft, whether you have a change of supplier, you get delayed. All of these things are all part of traveling. So we're just trying to stretch our psychological flexibility so we can cope with whatever, because hoping that we can fly and everything be just as like I want a smooth flight and I don't want turbulence and I don't want to fly at night. You know, these are just things that are just not in our power. They're all things out of our control. So one of the aims of doing things like what we do is to help you to sort of stretch what's possible in your head in terms of what you can cope with, because no flight will ever be perfect. As long as it takes off and lands, that's enough. Everything else is out of your control. So methods to detect rapid, I don't know where I went off there then. Methods to detect rapid depressurization. So a long time back, which is, I love this point, you read something about pilots' cognitive abilities being impaired due to depressurization. And so are the systems now more sensitive? Okay, so straight thing. So first of all, long time back. So yeah, 50, 60 years ago, there were things that we didn't know about depressurization. We had systems in place then. So to keep it really simple, there's two types. There's what we call slow depressurization, which could be like a leak, a very slow leak. So the pressure inside the cabin goes down slightly. What does that mean in effect? So the aircraft could be at 5 miles, okay? But for us as humans, that's not very comfortable breathing. The air is very thin for us. So the aircraft itself is like a big tube, is stuffed with more air, which so the pressure inside it is like being in like in Denver or somewhere like that, where you've got it's pretty high. Yeah. And so we can breathe comfortably there. And, you know, it's roughly about 7,000 feet. Yeah. So it feels a bit less in the Dreamliner, but it's all really comfortable and breathable. Yeah. But outside, it's very uncomfortable. So if there was something like a leak, which is very, very rare, of course, like all these things, but if there was a very slow leak and then the pressure started to go down, there are very, very delicate systems that pick this up. So for a slow leak, we would have a certain procedure. For a fast leak, which would be something like, I don't know, it's very rare. I can't think of the last time this happened, but something like a rapid decompression. And it's just even the words are not that great. Just means a loss of pressure very quickly. But what would happen in very short order is that the pilots will bring the aircraft straight down to 14,000 feet where we can breathe normally. And that would happen very fast. So sometimes people have posted incorrectly, including Chesney Hawkes lately, who was talking a little rubbish, but that's what a lot of people do because they're not pilots. And they said, we plummeted 10,000 feet. No, you didn't. You lowered the aircraft to a breathable altitude in very quick order. Because you're in a tube, you can't really perceive what's going. People say, oh, it felt like we were diving. You can't feel these things. Yes, you'd feel that you're coming down, but you cannot feel it. You imagine you can, but you cannot feel it. It's just your brain does all sorts of weird tricks with us, okay? So you come down to a breathable height. That happens very quickly. But also, whilst that's happening, the mask will drop automatically. They are triggered automatically. So the incident I think that you're talking about, Andrew, was a very long time ago where, this is something which you didn't realize, but there was 2 alarms that were in the flight deck. And one of them was for one really innocuous thing, and one was for depressurization, and they sounded very, very similar. I can't say the words. And because it was misread, then those pilots had impaired. We're talking like 50 or 60 years ago, which is why all of these things that happen like that, we learn from them and we change it. So those 2 things that were similar sounding have been completely changed. And that's the beauty of commercial aviation. Nothing repeats because we want to make sure we learn from it. So there's lots and lots of things that are in place as soon as there's any form of depressurization. In other words, the pressure outside So the pressure inside the aircraft starts to creep up more than what we'd expect it to do, whether it's slow or fast, we'll do something about it. We don't just sit around and go, oh, we've got procedures for everything, okay? And so, yes, the straight answer is there's lots of very sophisticated systems. There always has been, but what we've done is tweak the human side of it to understand that there were two alarms that are very similar, so let's sort that out. So everything that's in the flight deck now, for example, there's so many little natty things that natty, that's a word. There's so many really cool things in there now which have happened because we need to make it really obvious that when you pull a lever, if it's to do with the wheels, it has something shaped like the wheels on it. So everything is much more obvious now. I'm not doing it justice. If you ever get a chance to go into a flight deck at the end of an aircraft, at the end of a flight, ask them to show you some of the things like the flap levers or the wheel, the undercarriage, and your undercarriage lowering, and you'll see what I mean about this, that they've been ergonomically shaped to represent what they are actually moving. And these are all things that we've learned from. And this, your depressurization one, is a classic one. So yes, we do know, and a lot of stuff that gets reported in the media about this is complete tosh. Strong words. Okay, so Jamie's asked a question about landing and departure in thunderstorms. That they talk about when they left Zurich, there was thunder and lightning. So how do pilots determine how bumpy it is allowed to be? So the straight answer is they don't. It's set. So nothing is done in isolation. So pilots don't decide anything on their own. Everything's decided as a team. So you've got people do the flight planning, you've got people keeping an eye on the weather, you've got air traffic control, you've got the pilots themselves, and you've got computer systems that back up. So everything is checked. So there are strict legal limits. So we always say it's either safe to take off or it's not. Now, that sounds a bit simplistic. So you're not allowed to take off with a thunder cloud, like a storm cloud, not thunder, a storm cloud directly overhead. And the same is true for landing, but they move, they're floaty. So they move and they pass. And so that's why 1 minute you can come in and then the pilots might not decide no, it's not. All the air traffic control will say do a go around, which is then you do a circle and come back in again. And 2 minutes later, it's safe. It's the same with takeoff. There's crosswind limits. So the wind coming across the runway has to be a certain knot or speed. And if it's 1 knot over that, you don't take off or you don't land. It's that simple. So, and the same is true for pilots in terms of experience, the aircraft type, the time of day. It's very, very complicated, which is why I don't delve into this, because I'm now swimming outside of my lane here and staying firmly in my lane. I trust the pilots. I've been doing these courses for 25 years and I've listened to hundreds of pilots talk about this, all different pilots, all different airlines, working all around the world. And I trust now that there are so many processes and backups in place. It's not even a thought in my mind. It's either safe to take off or it's not. Hopefully that's not too simplistic, but that's a great question. Thank you. Emily, how do I fall asleep on a flight? Drugs? No. Being a bit flippant there. Lots of people worry about this because they think that you never can. But the reality is you've got to get to a place where you let go of the trust. The trust, you need to let go of being in charge of the aircraft, because you're not. So you need to let other people do their jobs. And then once you do that, then you're able to kind of look around and just be in the moment. And then different people, so some people find it very, very difficult to sleep on aircraft anyway. They'd be the same on trains and all the rest of it. They just can't relax enough to let go and trust that someone won't draw a moustache on them when they're asleep or something. They're just that general thing. But in an aircraft, it does mean letting go of the pilots and the crew. They're doing their job. And so we have to let go of that, because we're not, we're not controlling the aircraft, and us staying awake doesn't make any difference to the flight whatsoever, concentrating. So that's the first thing. And that's a big milestone for many of you, to get to the point where you trust them. Okay. And that will happen eventually. At some point, you'll just notice that you don't need to think about it so much. I don't know when it will happen for you, but it will if you keep doing this process of moving towards this. After that, it's then a case of doing things to make sure that you're as comfortable as you can be. So making sure you've got fluids, loose clothing, keep your area clear. So I see people clutter up their areas. They'll load themselves up. I'll chuck everything in the overhead lockers if you can, the overhead compartment things, or under the seat in front. So you keep everything clear for you. And then whatever you find works. So some people use these noise cancelling headphones just to sort of like pretend they're somewhere else. I don't know about that, but if that works for you in terms of helping you sleep, that's great. Some people find it helpful to have a couple of drinks just to relax a little bit. And others use some sort of herbal medications like Calms, I think it is, which is like a herbal based thing that helps them just chill out a little bit. And the other thing, of course, is using some form of breathing techniques to help yourself relax. But please practice those before you come on an aircraft, so that when you're on an aircraft, you've already got the time served, you've got the reserves to be able to then do that. Because if you leave only when you fly to then, right, let's do that breathing thing, you haven't practiced it, and it is a practice thing. So I really recommend practicing and getting really good at relaxing yourself on the ground in your favorite chair. And then when you're on board an aircraft, you could perhaps imagine that you're in your favorite chair at home. And then when you do the breathing, you're reincorporating something you've already practiced. I don't know if that helps, but good question. So last question I've got, and there may be some others come up, but I can't see on the screen, so I'll apologize and I'll try and get to them later. Mez has said, I'm a bit embarrassed to ask this. Please don't be, because what if you're thinking it's somebody else's? So it's a great question. Don't be embarrassed, okay? So before V1, that thing, got V1 and then you got rotate and they shove off. So there's this point on the runway, and years ago, this is one of the captains told me this, that it used to be that somebody would be stood there with a flag, and when the aircraft were the same, go, right, this is V1, and then you go, this is the point where you could, then after this point, then you pull back the stick and the cows get smaller. But that V1 point, in other words, they call it the decision point. So you, up until V1, you can literally stop the aircraft anywhere, and there's enough runway left. After V1, any problems you've got, if there is something that happens, even an engine failure, which of course, as you know, is exceptionally rare, you take it into the air because you've got enough power in the other engine and you've got enough momentum to do that. Okay. So how do you know where V1 is, and what about a miscalculation about runway length, takeoff speed? So I'll come to that one. So nothing's done in isolation. So the pilots use the computers. They also do it themselves manually. It's also worked out. They know exactly all the pressures on the day, how much fuel, how much we weigh, how much cargo we've got. So it's carefully worked out, and it's overworked out. So there's always what we call redundancy or a fudge factor. So for example, if based on the aircraft could take off, it could pull back the stick and the cows get smaller, they reckon they could do that at 120 miles an hour. They will probably do it at 140. So there's much more power there than we actually need. They don't use the full engine thrust for takeoff because you don't need to. You use enough thrust. Okay, so this is all carefully worked out, and it's cross-referenced. So there's always extra safety built into it. We call it redundancy, or capacity is what sort of a word I might use. There's always extra capacity built in. So nothing is ever, I can't imagine how you could have a miscalculation, because you're checking with each other before you make any decisions. And this is verified as well with your onboard computer systems. The other question that you've asked about is stalling on takeoff. Can it happen? So I think what you're talking about, so stalling for pilot terms is lift. We're talking about lift over the wing. That's what we mean by a stall. And a stall is when you have the angle of tack. So if this is what it's supposed to be, and you are, for some reason, you try to do that, well, you couldn't do that because you'd hit the tail on the runway anyway. So you are going to take off at the right speed. So is it possible to stall? Yes, it is. But stalling means where you don't have quite enough lift which is why it's carefully worked out, which is why all the flaps are out so that you can take off at slower speeds. You've got a massive surface area on the wing itself. So all of this stuff is thought about. So stalling, most of us will think about our engine stalling, but they've already tested them before they take off. And you may have seen Emma Henderson's post about this when she was in the Facebook group. She was talking about how they test the engines before they even move off down the runway. So all of this stuff is tested. So that sort of stall is exceptionally unlikely, because what they're doing before they even shoot off down the runway is that when they bring up the throttles, the power on the engines, they're checking that all the readings are exact. And you may have seen Ralph Miles also talked about this as well. So if you look for that thread, search Ralph Miles or Emma Henderson, you see that they both have talked about this very thing. So hopefully that will help you. So that's a great question, Les. Thank you for asking that. So lastly, we have got a podcast coming out on Wednesday, and I've just got to find a little tweak on that, but that'll be another great story. We've got a few other interviews lined up, which we're just waiting to confirm those as always. But if you've got a story, you want to come and tell your story, it doesn't matter what stage you're at in terms of your fear of flying, then please drop us a message, team@lovefly.co.uk, or you can DM us either on Instagram, that's Lovefly Help, or you can use the messenger function in the Lovefly Facebook group as well. Hopefully that was okay. Thanks ever so much for joining us today. And that's Lovefly. I don't know why I did that. I'm going to regret that. Anyway, thankfully it's not recorded. Oh shit, it is. So nice to see you all, and I look forward to seeing you next week and speaking to you in the podcast. Until then, take care.